And it is Weather Wagers time. Once again, we are thrilled to be coming with you. It's mid-July, and we're talking about so many different things from baseball to football to lots of different sports as we prepare for the All-Star break and we prepare for the upcoming football season. But I will tell you this, Dave Shiner.
Yes, sir.
We brought him back this week.
He's here.
He's
the man,
here.
the myth, the legend.
Well, he's not here, but he is with us.
He's in spirit and in
a digital form. That's right. It is great to have him back, finally. First of all, Dan, welcome back to the podcast. And I just want to give a shout-out to Dave Shiner for co-hosting with me the last several weeks as you've been on paternity leave. So welcome back, and tell everybody what it's been like and what you've been up to.
Well, I guess what haven't I been up to? I really respect all the fathers out there, all the mothers too, any parent. These past 6 weeks have been amazing. I'm very fortunate that our company, Nexstar, does allow for the 6 weeks of paternity leave now, but you need all 6 weeks to kind of learn your child, and we're still learning every single day. But we have a baby girl named Colette. My wife, Brittany, is doing just fine. So we have been learning all the routines, the ins and outs or lack of routines, the sleep, the diaper changes. But I will tell you one thing. I think I have a little sports fan, because even last night during the home run derby, when we were watching it, all of a sudden Colette's eyes just drifted over toward the TV and she just kept watching it. She liked baseball. We've been watching Phillies games. And, I think it's no surprise that the Phillies started a historic run the day after she was born. We've watched every game since together.
It's been a fun season. We know that. Have you been getting any sleep? That's what I wanted to know.
So I guess it's all relative these days. Usually the first chunk of sleep we get at night is the best one. It's about 4 hours, maybe a little bit more, give or take. And then after that, she kind of has a mind of her own. She will sleep a little bit more. Like this morning, she was ready to go by 6. So maybe like a total of 6 good hours of sleep. So that's not terrible for a new parent.
Have you been listening to this podcast?
I have been listening to this podcast. The times I get to be out in the yard and work, that's when I listen to my podcasts. And I will say, I've been hearing you guys bring up some of my hot takes. I've been hearing some of the Philadelphia Phillies negativity, but I've also been hearing a lot about college football. And it's hard to believe we're right in that time period again. I mean, between practices opening up soon again, even NFL training camps starting up in 2 to 3 weeks, it's almost football season.
And that is exactly why we are bringing on a special guest this week. We're going to get to that guest in just a second, but I would be remiss if, again, I want to give Dave Shiner a shout out. He did a phenomenal job. Dave is behind the scenes. He directs here at ABC 27. He runs the audio for this podcast, but he was able to step in. He's a sports fan. He's a fan of most of the same teams we are, Dan, and he was able to just fill in for you. So round of applause. Give yourself. Do we have an applause? Do we have?
Actually, I do have
okay.
that. I don't think Dan's going to hear it, but of course, I am underprepared because you did not tell me you were
that's the beauty of a podcast. It's all off the cuff, which Dan and I are used to. So
a
little applause for you. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Real quick, before we get to our guest, and most of this podcast is going to be devoted to college football. We are at the All-Star break this week in baseball. And Dan, actually similar to the guest that we have coming on, you are not afraid to speak your mind on Twitter. You're not afraid to take on the people that say, the Phillies have underachieved a little bit. You're not afraid to take me on when I start whining about their performance. Here we are at the All-Star break. Quick synopsis of where this team is. We're going to have much more on them throughout the rest of the summer, but I had to get your take because you haven't been here.
Well, I haven't been there, and I think I couldn't have asked for much better of a run for the Phillies while I've had this time off and being able to watch the games. The pitching has been like it was during the playoff run last year. I mean, other than the sporadic home runs from Aaron Nola or the occasional, bleeder that gets through off of Ranger Suarez, it's been elite. I mean, between the starters, the relievers, the closer and Craig Kimbrell, it's shut down stuff. And for all the people that complained 2 or 3 years ago with Girardi and the use of the bullpen and how games were blown, that is currently not the team's problem. And that's a good thing because there's a lot of bad pitching right now in Major League Baseball. So I think the overall view of everything, when you look at the pitching, they are a playoff team. To look at some of the negatives, Bryce Harper has not been himself. He's been more of a singles and doubles hitter rather than a power hitter, and that needs to change for them to make a run. The loss of Reese Hoskins, they've been still trying to figure out first base. Derek Hall had his injury issues. He's back. He could be a bigger player. They stuck Brandon Marsh in left field as kind of an experiment in keeping Christian Pache in the game. I think Christian Pache has become a folk hero after that home run in Miami. I mean, what an incredible little run he's had. So I think there's a lot of positives. I do think it's unfortunate we're in the best division in baseball. I mean, it's no coincidence that the teams that are beating up on us are the Miami Marlins and the Atlanta Braves. I mean, they have equally as good pitching, if not better at times, and even in some ways more power hitting than we do. So it's going to be a fun second half. There's a lot to look forward to. I do think they're a playoff team. I don't think they win the division, but I think there's a lot to look forward to.
Well, and again, we will get into some more of your hot takes probably next week or the week after as the Phillies come back from the All-Star break. But we want to talk about college football. And if you've been listening, Dave and I picked out some of our games that we were most intrigued by, games that were going to have fireworks last week in honor of the 4th of July. And they actually have some lines out, which we discuss heavily, especially in the fall on this podcast, of some of the week one action and the week one games. And we also talked about that in your absence, Dan. But today's special guest is here to talk about not only his legendary career, but college football as a whole. Dan, how excited are you that we're going to be able to chat with the one, the only Tim Brando coming up?
I am ecstatic. I mean, when you've been talking to him on the side and getting him on this podcast, I've just been thinking, man, it would be such a home run to have a huge player in the college football landscape, someone that many of us listen to every single Saturday in the fall, whether it's a Big Ten game or other Fox games that are out there. I mean, it's very possible he could be calling a Penn State game this fall. So I think it's very important to get his perspective. And I think he likes the wagering gambling side too, if I'm not incorrect. Is that right, Brent?
Well, we can ask him about that. The other thing I want to ask about, of course, is some of his favorite weather memories that he has from covering games on the road. I hope that he can take us inside his thoughts on NIL, the transfer portal. And yes, we're going to ask him about covering Penn State games and what a typical college football weekend is like for him. So I'm excited. You guys are excited. Without further ado, let's roll the interview, our chance to talk with the legendary Tim Brando.
Well, our guest today, it's a big one, comes straight to us from his chateau, and it's a familiar name to sports fans, especially college football fans. He's had a long and illustrious career in broadcasting and is here to tell us all about it and preview the upcoming college football season. As he prepares to be back in the broadcast booth, we are so excited to welcome Fox Sports' Tim Brando to Weather Wagers this week. Timmy B, as you are known, we thank you for coming on. This is certainly a thrill for us to have you on our podcast. Thanks for making time for us little guys here in Harrisburg. But we want to start with your broadcasting career, Tim. For those that may not know, I believe you were the original host of College Game Day on ESPN. You spent years with CBS hosting SEC football on Saturday afternoons, had your own radio show for many years. And now you've enjoyed time in the booth calling games with Fox. So take us through some of the highlights of your career, Tim, and tell us what stands out to you.
Well, I was born to do this. Most people, I think by now, know that I am a second-generation broadcaster. My father, who fought in World War II and was a communications man on a boat in the Atlantic, was also a broadcaster in waiting while he was in the war. Came back, went to the Columbia School of Broadcasting with his GI Bill, and he turned that into a burgeoning television career as TV came on the air in the early 50s in my hometown in Shreveport, Louisiana. He was also an entertainer, and he had a band that toured SAC air bases, and I was part of the show. I was a drummer slash a singer, and I was part of the act. We called them show bands, floor show bands back in those days. And I had to become a member of the Musicians Local 116. I think I'm the youngest member ever of the Musicians Union, and I had to be at age 7 in 1963 so I could get in the bars where the band was playing. I was part of the act, so if I was a union member, I could be around the dark liquor from time to time, and and it was just a blast. I was put out in the spotlight by him. My older sister was also part of the act. She would dance and sing, and so it was a very unique sort of uh, lifestyle that would compare probably to being in the, a service kid, an army or Air Force rat, because we were all over the place. But we stayed in Shreveport. We stayed in Louisiana because Dad had regular jobs, okay, in television, and also had his own ad agency. So he had about three different live shows going on local television, and helped put both of the stations that were local on the air when they came, both the CBS affiliate and the ABC affiliate. So I grew up around it, and I always knew I was going to be on television. And I had a bit of a teacher at home, someone that would help me with my very distinct Southern accent and help me with my phonetics, proofread some of my work before I wrote it and performed it, and it was great. Now, as fate would have it, my dad, who I think always was frustrated and wanted to be in California, uh, my mother and he separated when I was about 10, 11 years old. The band broke up. He moved out to California to become a screenplay writer and did really well with it. He was a very talented man on a lot of fronts, and he sort of lived vicariously through me, and another son that he had that was in the acting field, was a child actor, did very well for himself, uh, and now he's on cruise ships performing. My half brother, so he's got the lingering residue of my father's very short 58-year life is still out there from a performing standpoint and from a broadcasting standpoint. I got to be, because of the separation and because he got out of the local television business, uh, and would move away. I had to become sort of a regular kid because he wasn't there on a regular basis, and I sought being normal through sports like most kids in the '60s, and I was a decent enough athlete. Played all three sports until I got into the ninth grade, and my father knew that I wanted to be a broadcaster, and he had done very well in the hotel business in addition to writing while he was in California. And he bought a piece of a hotel in Monroe, Louisiana, which is about 100 miles away from Shreveport, when I was a uh, ninth grader. So this was 1971. And I think that he knew what I wanted to do because a guy that owned a local radio station in Monroe that knew my father from his pioneering days in TV said that he said he needed a play-by-play man for Neville High School football on Friday nights. And my dad said to him, "Well," he said, "Hub, we lost our play-by-play guy." Now, this was a storied program, Neville. They had won a lot of state championships, and still is a very solid program. He said, "We need somebody to." This guy left town. He got a job, and we need somebody this week to do our high school football for Neville football on Friday night. And he said, "I knew you were here, and I knew you could do it. So, would you be kind enough to help me out at least until I can find someone else?" And my dad, known as Hub Brando, HUB, short for Hubert, said to him, "Yeah, I'd be happy to help you out as long as you allow me to pick my color guy, my second banana." And he said, "Sure, I don't care who you bring. I just need you to do the games for us," having no idea that it would be his 14-year-old son. But it was me, and it's all I ever wanted to do from the time I was about 6 years old. Even when I was on the stage performing with my father, my true idols were people like Kurt Gowdy, Ray Scott, Jack Whitaker, Jim Simpson, the great Keith Jackson. All those people were the ones I idolized, and so I was ready for the opportunity, and I did play by play in the second half, and I did color in the first. So all the big plays, the plays that determined the outcome, the winner and loser, I got to do those, and we would get cassette recordings of each of the games. and it was a great experience for me. I was getting on a Continental Trailways bus at noon on Fridays. My mom and dad both went to see the principal at my junior high. That's what they call middle schools back then, and asked permission for me to get out of school at noon so I could take a bus to Monroe, that 100-mile drive, with my dad, who
Oh,
was
wow.
back and forth between California and there at that time. And we did the games together. And so he was my first partner. And I did high school football all the way through my high school days. Later in Longview, Texas, my junior and senior years, my dad left the booth. I was ready to do it on my own. And I was very busy also in speech and debate, and had gotten a scholarship to Northeast Louisiana University, which is now known as UL Monroe. And I did continue to play baseball all the way through high school. That was my sport of choice and the one I was best at. But I quit football specifically to call football, and it helped. It paid a lot of dividends for me, and that was sort of the beginning. And then it just went on. It was, I think a lot of times people need to realize this in our business. Um, Found opportunity is usually a key to success. If opportunity finds you and you're prepared for that opportunity, then you can take great advantage of it. I have no qualms with saying nepotism played a role in my career getting started, because there are so many second generation broadcasters from my age group. I'm 67. There are a ton of baby boomers out there. Marty Brenneman's son Tom, Skip Carey's son Chip, Joe Buck, Jack Buck, the great Jack Buck's son, are all Ernie Johnson Jr., who I worked with Ernie Sr. on Braves baseball between 94 and 96. And Ernie Sr. came out of retirement because he thought he was going to work with his son. But Ted Turner had other ideas with the Goodwill Games and various and sundry other events. And so I always joked with Ernie Jr. saying, I was sort of the child out of wedlock that your dad had, because we're the same age. Ernie Jr. and I are the same age. And it turned out that I was doing those games with his father rather than him, simply because his career was taking off at TBS and TNT at that time. So I've been blessed throughout my career, but that was the start. That's how I got it going. And believe it or not, I'm not alone. A lot of other people in our business began that way.
Well, that gives us a sense of your roots. But before we get into your current job and some thoughts on the football side, I have to ask one thing, because you've been tweeting about it. It's been in the news. Did you almost have a chance to host Wheel of Fortune?
Yeah, that's an old story, fellas. It's been out for people. People in the industry knew that way
Yeah.
back when. It got a lot of ink, probably before you were born. And 1988 was the year. So if you weren't around for the dinosaur era of ESPN when we began Game Day in 1987, you probably wouldn't know about it. It got back into the news because people were tweeting it out when Sajak announced his retirement.
Right.
And people were goading me on Twitter about, hey, are you going to audition again? That kind of thing came up. And but yeah, I not only auditioned for it, I got 3 more pilots for game shows besides that came from it. And the one pilot that hit was a show that was so off the wall and so different. It sold, and it was going to go on the network television, and I just couldn't do it. By that time, I had established myself at ESPN, and I just thought back then, if I did a show like the one they were talking about doing, it would destroy my credibility as a sportscaster. The name of the show was Grudge Match, and it was sort of a Judge Wapner, meets the Squared Circle, where they would go into small claims court in Burbank and find people that had these frivolous lawsuits against each other, and the producers would bring them in there and cite what the lawsuit was about, and then have them duke it out for 3 rounds, choosing your apparatus. They would have 36 pounds gloves, 36-ounce gloves in the 3rd round, and then they might have a food fight in the 1st round.
Oh my!
And crazy stuff. the late Lyle Alzado and Jesse the Body Ventura of WWE fame
Yeah.
were my analysts. I did the pilot and it sold. It was one of the biggest shows at NAPTY that year in 1991. And all that came from my audition on The Wheel. Rolf Benerschke did the daytime version of Wheel. And the reason he got the job, and I didn't, based on what I was told, was that Merv, who loved my work and actually called my agent, who was in California at the time, had me fly out for it. I didn't live in California. So, I wasn't one of those regurgitated game show hosts that kept, being recycled through the game show frigid air, Yeah, I was going to be a unique hire. And because I was already fairly well known from sports, it got a lot of ink and sports media critics. And I even made the Globe and the National Enquirer. Vanna's picking her other guy and all this other stuff. But Rolf Benerschke was a kicker for the San Diego Chargers and had played with a colostomy sac through his career in the NFL. And it was a really compelling story. And he had gone on AM Los Angeles shortly after I auditioned, and Merv fell in love with him, thought he would be the perfect host. He had never done television in his life. He got the job, and he was on for about 6 weeks, and they canceled the daytime version. Just to quickly put it in perspective for you, Sajak was never leaving the Wheels syndicated version that runs after newscasts, usually around 6:30, 7 o'clock. He was leaving the daytime version, which was exclusive to NBC, because he was doing a nighttime talk show. He had signed for 13 weeks with CBS to go up against Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show. So there was a non-compete in there, and he could not be on NBC. And that's why the job opened. And it was my little brush with destiny. If you've seen the audition, tape, it's out there. It's people can see it. I did a complete segment with guest contestants that came from the studio audience. They were playing for real prizes and real money, and it went really well. I one take, I got it in one take.
That's cool.
It was unique because I didn't have an IFB. In sports, we're used to having producers and directors in our ear talking about what's coming up next. There's none of that in game shows. It's dummy cards, no teleprompter, but dummy cards and stage managers pointing you from one camera to the other. I basically had to learn one thing and commit it to memory, and that was when you spin the wheel. Remember, contestants, top dollar value on the wheel is $1,000. Do not hit bankrupt, because if you do, you lose your cash, but not your merchandise. And here's the puzzle. So I do remember that.
That's neat.
And then it was on to the show, interviewing the contestants and then getting on with the puzzle. But it was a great experience, one that I value even to this day. But it's funny because, and I laugh about it, because I think I got more ink at that point in my career. I was 31, 32 years old, maybe at that time. I had started at ESPN when I was 29 in 1985. So to that point in my career, it had been probably the most, even College Game Day at that time. Remember, ESPN and cable television was still new. We were only in 25 million homes back then. So I would have been a fresh face for a nationally syndicated game show had it happened. And my near miss, I think, got me more ink than any broadcast of a ball game I ever did. So, but that's why it came back up recently on social media.
Cool.
Well, we could listen to these stories all day about TV. Brett and I are children of TV, as we like to say, and we got into this business because we grew up watching some of the game shows, some of the sitcoms in the 90s, and I grew up watching our station, so I feel very blessed to get into local television, but you're at a whole different level, which is really cool.
Well, I've always said this, sportscasters and weather broadcasters, meteorologists, but people that had done, before there were meteorologists, a lot of times the guy that did the sports also did the weather. That happened in a lot of markets. And the reason was the guy that did the sports was more likely to be a guy that had to ad lib a lot. that they'd send out on location. You had to wear a lot of different hats in the early days of local television. As I mentioned, my dad had 3 different shows. One was a kiddie show, one was a variety show where his band would play on Sunday nights, and the other was Hub Brando's Search for Talent, which was a local version of Star Search that he had in the local markets. And this was before network television was a big deal. And network television really did not come of age until the mid 60s. So if you were on local television between 1952 and 1965, you were wearing a lot of hats, doing a lot of different things, whether it be a parade in your downtown area, and you had to ad lib it. And usually the guys that did the weather or did the sports were the guys that would more than likely be on location doing more ad libbing. I've oftentimes said election coverage during the political season, you really see the difference between news anchors that are locked into a teleprompter versus broadcasters, really good broadcasters that don't have to have a teleprompter to do election coverage. And when you're going from spot to spot, to this headquarters, to that headquarters, to get the latest from this or that precinct, you need that skill set. And weathermen and sportscasters have that more so than newsmen, I think, at the local level.
Well, we'll pat our backs on that. I mean, I do agree with you. And as you may know, too, the industry is kind of going back to that you wear multiple hats over and over again, different roles. So certainly things cycle back through. I want to ask you about Spencer Tillman, and it's July. We're getting ready for broadcast. You two have worked together for decades, and it shows. You have good chemistry on the air. What makes your friendship with him so special? What's it like to work with somebody for that long? That's also rare in sports.
Yeah, there's no doubt that he's helped extend my career, and I think he'd say the same of me. When you have that kind of chemistry, you cannot, you can develop chemistry. I'm not saying that you can't. Chemistry is something that can evolve, but when it really works from the jump, and ours really did work from the jump, it can be magical. It's almost as if you're thinking along the same lines as your partner, and we might say something before the other one was ready to say it, and we just have to laugh at each other when that happens. You don't want to call him out by saying you took the words right out of my mouth. You hear people say that sometimes, and it's like in a complimentary way, you're really throwing a guy under the bus when you say that. And we've learned not to, but we'll just sort of chuckle at each other when a moment like that comes up. Because of my hosting, and I did a lot of both studio and play-by-play. Not everybody's done that. Not everybody can do both with relative ease. But because we've both done that, he was in the studio with me for a lot of those years at CBS, and he was also doing NFL games with me at the same time. A lot of people didn't know, but we could be doing all day Saturday in the studio at CBS, and then be hustled out to Teterboro to get on a flight to Cincinnati to do a noon kickoff the next day for an NFL regional game that could be going to 3% of the country. Those were fun days, and we were active, but not everybody knew that we were doing that much work, but we were. So we got a lot of reps together in both places. He came in after my first year in the studio at CBS. He was working weekends at WABC. Scott Clark was the main sports anchor there. In the NFL, played for 9 years. He got a Super Bowl win against the Broncos when he was a 49er. He was the special teams captain for that Super Bowl. And he had also played for the Oilers on 2 occasions. He was drafted right out of Oklahoma after being an Orange Bowl MVP and winning a national championship in '86. And then Jerry Glanville brought him back as a free agent after his Super Bowl year, and he played another couple of years. In fact, he was on that Oilers team that blew that big lead against the Buffalo Bills back in '93 in the playoffs, that you might recall when Frank Wright came in and took over for Jim Kelly, and they had that great comeback. But Spencer always knew that he was going to be in sports and he was going to be a broadcaster. That was his major in college. I had met him in college, covering him when I was at ESPN. And after the stint with the 49ers had ended, and before he went back to Houston to play for a couple of more years, he actually auditioned with me at ESPN. He was one of about a half dozen or so former players that were getting out of the league that they brought in, like going through the ESPN car wash, meeting with people, and then doing about a quarter's worth of commentary work in a soundproof booth in Bristol. So I had actually done his audition tape years earlier. Well, when I got to CBS, Craig James, who I'd worked with a little bit at ESPN, the big pony I called him, he had just left ESPN, and Herb Street had come in to replace Craig at ESPN. He went to CBS to join up with Lou Holtz, and Lou and Craig and I did the studio when CBS called me in to do that show. They had just gotten the NFL back, and so Jim Nantz had to do the NFL Today, and they needed a new host for the College Football Today, and I got that job. That year, Lou Holtz got an offer to go back into coaching at South Carolina in the SEC. He took it. The NFL Today show was struggling with some people working around Jim that really didn't need to be in the studio. George Seifert didn't need to be there. I think Brent Jones, the former 49er tight end, was in there, and Marcus Allen, I think, was the other. It just didn't go particularly well. Jerry Glanville hung. Jerry was entertaining, but they asked Craig, because he had a great career in the NFL too with the Patriots, playing in a Super Bowl. So Craig graduated to the NFL Today. Lou took the South Carolina job. I needed someone to join me, and they decided that the guy over at WABC working weekends was pretty good. They had no idea that I had done his audition tape 5 years earlier at ESPN. So when he came over to CBS, it was like, oh man, this is going to be great. I know this guy. He knows me. We're gonna be fine. And it was magical. And we would frequently bring in a third wheel, and that third wheel was Archie Manning, or it was Tony Barnhart, a noted scribe, Mr. College Football. And we had a blast doing that show, and got great reviews, and it went really, really well. And then I abruptly left in 2013, and that's another story for another day. You'd need another podcast to get all that in, how and why that my exit from CBS took place. But it did take place, and that was a tumultuous time for me, because I had not planned on having that exit take place so quickly. But I did have time, about 8 or 9 months to relocate. And as it so happened, when a door shuts, another door will open. Found opportunity, as we were talking about before. I was really wanting to be a Fox guy for a long time. You guys know, because you were watching. Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson were having a time of their lives, calling all these SEC games. Spencer and I would get out occasionally when we had 2 games. Always wanted to do. It was my dream job, and now I'm into my late 50s, and I'm not doing what I want to do. The studio was great, and I'm very, very blessed to say that it paid marvelous dividends for my exposure, my visibility, and to some extent my popularity. Probably would never have had a Tim Brando show that was televised on their cable network and distributed nationally for almost 15 years had I not done the studio. But I wanted to be at the games, and Vern was showing no signs of wanting to leave, and he didn't for quite some time after that. And Fox called in June of 2014, and I went out there, and they did not have the Big Ten at that point, but they were growing their portfolio. They told me this is what their vision was. This is what they wanted to do. They were growing it, and wanted me to be a part of that growth. And I've been there ever since. I'm starting my 10th year
Wow.
this coming fall, and just re-up for another 3 years. But long story short, Spencer's, we were very careful to make sure our contracts didn't come up at the same time. We liked that. And Spencer had 1 year left on his deal with CBS when I left. And when his deal was up, like me, he wanted to get to games. He was tired of the studio, and it just so happened that an opening was created when Charles Davis, uh, our outstanding lead analyst for college football, moved to the NFL at Fox. This was before Charles went to CBS. Charles moved up to the NFL, and Donovan McNabb was also doing some games in the NFL, and they were hoping, I think, to use him on some college football. But Donovan had an issue that took place uh, off the off the field, and his spot suddenly became open, and they were in need of an analyst. And some of the bosses were looking around, and at one point, this is 30 at this point 35, 36 years maybe in television, sports television. It's the only time it's ever happened. They said to me, Tim, is there anyone that you know about that you would like to have work with you? I said, it just so happens that I know about this guy, and he was my partner for the last 16 years of my 18 at CBS, Spencer Tillman, and they hired him. And he's been with me since 2015. I worked with Brady Quinn and Joel Klatt, those two together. Brady on Saturdays and Joel on weeknights when we had weeknight games at Fox my first year. And Brady was just getting out of the NFL, and Joel was just beginning to cut his teeth and become a great young broadcaster. But they were going to have opportunities elsewhere. I needed a partner, and Spencer was the guy. And so here we are. This will be the 25th year of us being together in the fall. Only 1 year in 26 that we've been apart, and that was my first year at Fox in 2014. So, ours is really a small business. People don't think about that, but network sports television is pretty, it's pretty incestuous. All of the producers, directors know each other. Most of the talent, I worked at 4 networks in 37. This is my 38th. This is my 38th year on national television. I started in '85. So from ESPN to Turner to CBS, people forget about the 3 years I spent at Turner doing the NBA and inside the NBA and the playoffs. And I did the Atlanta Braves with Ernie Johnson Sr. while I was doing SEC games on Raycom Sports, a syndicator that used to carry the ACC and the SEC. So that was the first time anybody ever asked me my opinion, though, on who I'd like to work with. And I thought, man, I'm working at the right spot. These people are they're actually asking me my opinion. That never happens.
Well, that's fun, and we are the benefactors of it. Tim, let's talk about some things this year with the current landscape of college football. We just want to ask you about a couple of specifics, and then the overall kind of the overall outlook of the sport. So let's start with specifics. Dan and I are Penn State graduates, good meteorology program there, but we're also football fans. We talk a lot about the weather, a lot about Penn State games. You've called Penn State games in recent years with Fox having the Big Ten. So tell us what you see. They're getting a lot of buzz nationally, but do they have enough power? They still have the same two foes in Ohio State and Michigan, don't they?
Schedule is softening some. They don't have them in their future 9-game schedule. They're not going to be both there every year, which is going to benefit, I think, Penn State from a scheduling standpoint. You still have the Big Ten title game. Remember, Tony Petitti, the new commissioner, unveiled that 2024 schedule and how it's going to work with teams rotating on and off. And I thought Penn State caught a break there, that you won't see necessarily both Michigan and Ohio State every year on that schedule, whereas those two will have to play each other every year. Those natural rivalries and and how their rotation is going to work. The idea, the concept being at Big Ten that they want every team to have played everywhere every 2 years, okay, against everybody every 2 years. Is going to come out of this with a little bit of an advantage from a scheduling standpoint down the road. As for, remember, the divisions are going away too, okay? So it'll be the top 2 teams that will be participating in the Big Ten championship, not East, West, after this year. Now, it'll be status quo this year. But, in the future, starting in 24, when we expand to 12 teams in the playoff, I think the schedule is going to be very important. And I think the Nittany Lions are going to catch a little bit of a break with the way the rotation works, with the current landscape being the way it is. Listen, I'm a big James Franklin guy. I think a lot of Penn State fans, mostly the older generation, has been skeptical of him. I think a lot of the younger fans really identify with his energy, his enthusiasm, and his approach. But some of the old blue bloods, I think, have been slow to turn because he hasn't had enough of those wins against Ohio State and Michigan, which is understandable. That's part of it. Comes with the territory. We know that. But I think they're on the precipice. And the reason I think that is because he's recruiting at a very high level, competing with Ohio State probably more than Michigan is for the 4.5 to 5-star talent. Now, he's not winning enough of those, and that's why Ohio State has had an edge. Now, I would argue last year, Penn State sort of gift wrapped that game late to Ohio State. They were right there, had a really good chance of winning that football game. But the issue for them is that if they get banged up, if they have too many injuries, they don't have the depth, meaning at least 2 great players at every position on the field, the way Ohio State does. But let's say this for Michigan. They have leveled with 3 stars and really not the same caliber of recruiting classes. You'll see Penn State in the top 10 a lot more than you'll see Michigan in overall recruiting around the country. But because they're somewhere in between 15 and 20, but they are consistently between 15 and 20, and their guys are staying all those years, over time, Michigan has gotten good. Right when Michigan fans were about to give up on Harbaugh, he came through, and now he's got the upper hand on Ohio State. And you can argue, but Ryan Day may be the one on the hot seat now if Michigan were to win this year and it become 3 straight. Fans at Ohio State are not wired like Michigan. Michigan fans, I think winning Big Ten championships is fine with them. I mean, they are fine with Big Ten championships. Ohio State fans want the whole potato. They want all of it, and they don't want to lose a game. Period. Penn State fans, I think, are a little bit somewhere in between where Michigan and Penn State, Michigan and Ohio State fans are. And I think, again, because excuse me, iPad went away there. Are you there? Oh,
We
sorry.
were here. We can hear you. Yep.
I think because because of that, I think that they are very close to getting where they want to go, and should be in good shape.
So let's talk about the Big Ten just in general. So, you're calling a lot of these games. What excites you about the conference this year? Is it, the Matt Rule situation taking over Nebraska that's fallen on hard times? Is it Kirk Ferentz and resurgent Hawkeyes, maybe with a little bit more offense this year and a quarterback? Or is it some of this uncertainty? James Franklin, now the second longest tenured coach in the Big Ten, now that Pat Fitzgerald is out at Northwestern. Or is it just the usual rinse and repeat, Ohio State, Michigan, the 2 perennial powers?
Oh, there's nothing just rinse and repeat. It's not that simple. I mean, it's not. Now, that for those outside the Big Ten footprint, that's their perception. Okay.
Sure.
And I think that's really the battle that the Big Ten has. I'm oftentimes asked about SEC supremacy and what the Big Ten needs to do. Listen, the footing in the college football world is much more even than people realize. College football's world is really flat. NIL and transfer portal has a lot to do with that, by the way. Okay, I mean it really does. Let's say, well, by example, Iowa's situation is horrible from an offensive standpoint. Well, okay, and is Kirk Ferentz' job on the line? Might be, could be. Their fans wanting to get rid of his son. I don't think that's going to happen. But they're going to have to change that offense to fit McNamara, who's transferring over from Michigan, and that kid is a winner. And I think that he can make a world of difference. Iowa, in my view, is, and we still do have a Western Division and an Eastern Division this year, and I think Iowa is really very much in the mix in the Western Division, along with Wisconsin, who might be a challenger to the top 10. Luke Fickell is going to be very successful there. He's got a totally new offense. They're going to get away from the ground and pound. They're going to go spread. They're going to sling that thing all around. Camp Randall fans are ready to jump, and I don't mean just at the end of the third quarter, about what's going to be happening there. I don't have our schedule just yet, so I can't tell you officially where Spencer and I are going to be week one. But I've got a hunch that we might be at Camp Randall because Buffalo's a pretty good team. They've been going to bowl games out of the MAC. Lance Leipold did a wonderful job there. The guy that followed him has also been doing great. Luke Fickell's first game, I think, is going to be one that people are going to want to watch, and I think they're going to be enthused to see that Wisconsin can reach to the heights of their great runs, maybe under Brett Bielema, with a different offense that is going to do more than just a play action pass on third down, okay, which has been what they've really done all these years. There's excitement there. There's excitement at Illinois after the season that Bielema had. I think the Illini are that team is really good, and they've recruited really well. There's no reason why Illinois shouldn't be good. It's been a sleeping giant for a long time. You take those two teams along with Iowa, as I mentioned, and and Minnesota. I don't think you can count row the boat out of it either. There's going to be a lot of balance again in the West. Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, all fun stories to watch. I think the team that may be trending downward, and it's going to be interesting to see how he combats that with all the love and all the money that he got. But Michigan State, that's a tough turnaround that they've got in front of them with the schedule that they have. But I tell people all the time when comparing the SEC to the Big Ten, the Big Ten is better at making money than any other conference. The SEC is better at winning championships than any other conference. So what the Big Ten's got to focus on now, they've found a way to get to the playoff. Okay, the Big Ten has gotten to the playoff, but they haven't won one since 14. They haven't won one since Urban got the national title against Marcus Mariota and Oregon, first year of the college football playoff in 14. Michigan's gotten there now a couple of times and laid eggs. You got to get there and do damage. That's what the Big Ten's got to be able to do. And when we get to 12 teams, I think it's only going to enhance the Big Ten's chances, because think about all those teams with 9-3 or 10-2 records. How many of them are Big Ten teams? Those trophy games that I've had in recent years between Iowa and Wisconsin were traditionally number 11 versus number 16, number 15. Those games could be for the opportunity to get in the playoff, even if they didn't play in the Big Ten championship in future years. So the Big Ten's in a great spot. They don't have the titles, and that's what's missing. But they've got everything else. They've got the population base. They've got the television audience to garner all of that revenue from the company I work for, plus NBC at prime time, plus CBS when they're through with the SEC after this year. There's no reason that they can't play for and get their fair share of national championships, and that's really all that separates it from the SEC.
Tim, I think we have like just three more questions here. The one is, and you can take a broad view of this. What do
Sure.
you think about the, because you were kind of outspoken about this too, and I don't know if you upset some Feinbaum callers, but the SEC decided to stay at 8 games, and you were a little critical of that. But I mean, honestly, with the 12-team playoff coming up, the Big Ten's been playing 9. I think the Big 12 has been doing a round robin. They're expanding. I mean, shouldn't all these conferences play the same amount of games anyway? I mean, just elaborate on your thoughts on that, I guess.
Well, let me say this. I don't know about the Feinbaum callers, but I know I wrinkled the brow of Paul. That's for sure. And I really I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to, but I have a habit, I think, sometimes of speaking in absolutes.
Sure.
And maybe my tone wasn't what it should have been. Maybe not one of my finer moments. But I was specifically going after the commissioner, not Paul. I mean,
Right.
I was going after the commissioner because Sankey, during COVID, I don't think there's any question that he was college football's #1 leader. He navigated through COVID so much better than anybody else. And Warren and Kliavkov, the people out in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, it didn't look good for them. The SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC had a different take, and I think theirs was proven to be the right one. But Greg led the way there, and I thought he looked very much like a commissioner for the entire sport, which is what college football really needs. I do think Tony Petitti, because I worked for him for 9 of my 18 years at CBS. I know the man really well. He loves college football, cares deeply about it. He was really the author and the architect of Roy Kramer's Bowl Championship Series that preceded the CFP. I think Tony and Greg together, if they coalesce and form a collegial atmosphere between themselves, I think the rest of the college football world will notice that and hopefully rally around it. We need those two men of the two most powerful conferences in America be on the same page. I thought Greg cowered. I thought he cowered to the presidents of his schools in the SEC that are only trying to get bowl eligible. They looked at the circumstances and said, okay, so if we're going to play an extra game, we've done the math here. We're piled high chance of losing one more game, aren't we? So if we're going to do that, we want more money. Well, I mean, wait a minute. Hang on just a second. You're going to ask ESPN to pay you more money, and they gave you $300 million per year, and they gave you that back in 2019 for a contract that doesn't start until 2024, and you're asking for more money.
Right.
I mean, what? I mean, let's face it. That was the commissioner was trying to leverage his television partner into more money. And when ESPN, given the landscape financially, said, up another, I don't know what it would have been, 60, 70, 80 million before the deal ever started, they're in the middle of cutting, thousands of jobs at Disney.
Yeah.
That would not have looked very good. So I thought that was the elephant in the room, and that question should have been asked, and it wasn't. And they had led us to believe, they being the SEC, that they were going to go to 9 games. They had told their athletic directors and presidents at the schools, take a look and start thinking about, who you'd like to play or who you can afford not playing in a 9-game schedule. And then to pull the rug out from underneath that at their meetings in the spring, I thought was disingenuous at best. And I thought the commissioner, when he was on with Paul, was somewhat callous in talking about his league's dominance. He made mention of the 65-7 score against TCU a lot.
Yeah.
And I thought that was, wait a minute, TCU did beat Michigan to get there. Okay, so that's one of the great stories of college football a year ago. I didn't like that either. So I pointed that out, and and if it came off as though I was being overly critical of Paul. That was not my focus. It may have landed that way, and we've since kissed and made up privately. But the bottom line is
Good.
the bottom line is I believe we need uniformity in college football.
Yeah.
We need. I mean, granted, every league has its own set of rivalries. Its institutions have its own set of missions. I get all of that, but in Division I college football, we should have those teams playing the same number of conference games, and there should be guidelines on the non-conference games that at least two of those non-conference games should be against this type of competition. Okay, you can't load up on FCS teams and play them in late November. That's tantamount to a bye week. Okay, and still getting a home field check when you do that. I just don't think that's right. And we need these guys that are in charge, people like Sankey, who right now is the most powerful man in the sport. He is. But I do think Tony Petitti will be right there with him immediately because he's that bright. He's not as experienced administratively in college athletics, but I'm here to tell you, he's very experienced in understanding what college sports is all about, and specifically college football and what its needs are. I think that we need those guys to work together, and we need them to think globally, not just about their constituency, but globally about where the sport is for everyone. And by the way, those so-called non-power fives, you know, those teams that have come from the American or from the Sun Belt, that will no doubt in a 12 or 16 team playoff earn their way in. We got to take care of them because you're not going to fill out your entire schedules. I don't care who you are without playing some of those teams. The college experience needs to remain at all 10 of those conferences. And we need to stop categorizing them as Power Five, Group of Five, FCS. You know, let's stop all that. It's been proven that if teams can line up, look at Tulane last year, fellas.
Yes.
I mean, Kansas State beats TCU. Kansas State beats TCU last year in the rematch. Spencer and I had the first game when TCU came from 18 down to win in October. And then in the rematch, you know, they did a hell of a job stopping Max Duggan at the 1 yard line. And they went on to win the Big 12 title. Fortunately, the committee was smart and made sure TCU remained in the playoff, and they were proven a worthy choice when they beat Michigan. They were. But what Kansas State did in beating TCU, when you think about their other loss, it was to whom? It was to Tulane. And people threw dirt on Kansas State all season long for losing to TCU. How did that Cotton Bowl game go for USC? Huh? How did it go? Tulane was pretty doggone good.
Yes, they were.
And they may be again this year. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you now, I'm really, really good again. So we gotta stop raining on people's parades. The NCAA tournament is glorified by Cinderella. College football stomps on Cinderella's jugular vein all the time. Gives them no chance. And we gotta do a better job of protecting all of those that participate in college football at the Division I level.
Preach, because we certainly feel the same way. Two more questions, quick, Dan. You have one, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Yeah, so I think this kind of speaks to what you were just talking about, Tim. It just seems like year after year, the bowl season kind of falls a little bit flat. And, you know, I don't know if it does need a commissioner of college football or something to fix this. You were mentioning how schools are worried about bowl eligibility. Well, that's fine. But a lot of these games end up being blowouts or they're buried in the TV schedule. Do you think the 12-team playoff helps settle some of this, that there's more positive attention on the college football postseason?
Oh, yeah. I think about this. Watch this as the season develops this year, okay? When we get to, say, the 1st of November, okay, and we start getting into some of the rivalry games, okay, the Floyd of Rosedale game, you know, those kinds of, the Paul Bunyan Axe game, you know, those type of games. Think about what those games would mean if we were selecting 12 teams and potentially what it might be worth if we were talking about 16 teams. This is my contention. and I don't know that all your viewers and fans know this, but we are starting the 12-team playoff format with the old TV deal in place. They're starting a year early. It's like a test pattern, okay? Because they're going to start negotiating the television rights this coming year for 2026. All right. Rest assured, there will be more than just one corporate company in charge. There'll be multiple broadcast entities involved. Okay. Hint, hint. Okay. So,
right.
I really believe this is going to happen. Once they do the 12, which is not this year, but the following year. All right. Once they do the 12 and they see how successful it is, not just for the postseason, but for enhancing viewership of the regular season. Well, college football is already the second most popular television sport out there. Okay. Major League Baseball's numbers, NBA numbers, on average, do not compare with college football's regular season and postseason numbers. They don't. Now, the NFL is a different story. It's Goliath, but college football has the potential to have NFL type numbers for its postseason, but not with just 4 teams. No way, and not with a month off before you actually play the games. You've got to have, a real playoff feel going from week to week, and with 12 teams in or 16, you're going to start it in mid-December. Okay, like the second, third week of December, and it's going to move forward. Teams will be eliminated. Teams that will pull victories are going to move to the following week, and you're going to take some of those viewers with you. College football has not taken advantage of that. The calendar has just been a joke. You play on Thanksgiving weekend, you have the championship week, the first week of December, and then you don't play for a month. And then you finish it off the second week in January on a Monday night. Huh? At 9 o'clock Eastern time. What are you doing? So we got to fix all that, and they are going to fix it. But that 12 team, when you're watching this year, and we get to those games in November, think about how much more important that game rather than 4. I think you'll be amazed. And then when we have it, when we go to 12 in 2025, all right, I think people are going to go in my business. Okay. And the one thing we know that schools do have, one thing they can all agree on is they need more money. College campuses always need more money, right? And I don't care how many presidents look down their noses at athletics that are, strong academicians, but they all have one thing in common. They want the money that's coming from those sports programs. When they see how much money they're forfeiting by not having teams 1, 2, 3, and 4 playing home games the opening week of the playoff, they're going to go, hey, regular season still means something. If the top teams are still playing at home, think about the revenue generated, how much it would mean for those top 4 teams to not have a bye, but actually play another home game. Okay. So it's 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14. Okay. There's no reason not to do that. You're not extending it any. You're just making the top 4 play. And I think that when we get a new TV contract, the brand new one, okay, because the first year we're going to be playing with the old one. When they go to the new one, I think we're going to have 16 teams in 2026. And I think you'll see the sport grow even further because, as I said, the back end of the regular season is going to mean a hell of a lot more when you're talking about teams in all those conferences that are ranked somewhere between, let's say, number 8, 9, and 20, all vying for those big wins that could vault them into the top 16. I mean, to me, that is a no-lose situation for college football's future.
I think you're right. It's going to be more exciting for you as broadcasters. It's going to be more exciting for us as viewers. It's going to give us more stuff to talk about too. And that's just going to grow the sport exponentially. Tim, this has been a great conversation. Before we let you go, we have to ask, because we are meteorologists and we usually ask our guests this on weather wagers. Can you remember a specific game that you've broadcasted where the weather just stunk. Maybe snow or rain
Oh.
or freezing rain. Big Ten weather. It doesn't have to be Big Ten weather. You've done games all over, but talk to us about maybe a particular game you remember where the weather was the story.
Well, I don't know that you'll ever have anyone on the air with you with this that could have ever matched the two I'm going to give you. All right. The first one is in the Big Ten. Scott Frost's home opener against Akron, 2017. They're going to bring Big Red out. The prodigal son is coming home. The Huskers are sold out for what, I don't know, it was like the 237th consecutive home sellout or whatever it was. And here comes Frost out. Nebraska's playing. The black shirts are out. Akron goes back to receive the opening kick. And it's a touchback. Probably one of the greatest calls that I've ever had on a kickoff. And then the bottom dropped out, and we stayed there for 3.5 hours waiting to see if they were going to play. They never did. And those great I thought after what you've seen, they had a national championship parade for his team when he left Orlando. And here he is coming back to Nebraska. And the first game, they barely got a sweat up running out onto the field, and the game was never played. And I'm talking about a torrential. Look up you guys have the opportunity, I know, to go back and look at weather patterns. Go back and look what was hitting that part of Nebraska that night and into the next day. And we stayed until well past 1 a.m. Eastern time. Hoping that we would get it in. And then the next morning, there was some talk about maybe they might try to play Sunday victory. Okay, we'll never know. But the next week, they had to go to Colorado. They lost a close game, and the wheels came off the rest of the way. I think those clouds were not just cumulus, but ominous for Scott Frost's career at Nebraska. Bad omen. And the other one is in the SEC. They actually made a 30 for 30 documentary about it. It was the SEC basketball tournament of 2008. I'm on the air doing the quarterfinal round of the Southeastern Conference basketball tournament, and an F1 tornado hits the Georgia Dome in the midway through the first overtime period between Alabama and Mississippi State. They stopped the game, cleared the floor. The good news is a kid named Mikhail Riley hit a three-point shot falling out of bounds. He hit a three-point shot that hit both the backboard and the iron was kind to send the game to OT. Had that game ended in regulation, okay, and that shot not gone in, about 10 to 15,000 of the 30,000 fans would have been exiting the Georgia Dome and probably in harm's way when that tornado hit. And lives were probably saved by that kid making that shot. Sports Illustrated turned it into a cover story as the miracle shot, the Miracle 3. And that's the name of the documentary. If you want to watch it sometime, it's both enjoyable and memorable from a meteorological standpoint. It's called the Miracle 3, and it's one of the SEC series, SEC Storied, that they produced about a year or two later in 2010. So I don't know if you can come up with two any better than that.
I don't think so, especially because one's a basketball game where you typically don't think involved. But that's impressive. Well, Tim, thank you so much for making time for us today. We greatly appreciate it. As we said, we're big fans of yours. We'll be watching you on Fox Sports. We hope to see you up in Happy Valley this season as well.
Oh, I do too, Brett. Let me tell you, I I want to be there. Trust me when I tell you, I really want to be there. And if I do get there with Spencer, I hope you guys stop by and say hello.
We will do that. Tim, thanks again. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
Wow. Well, there it was. I mean, you talk about unpacking just about everything possible in college football and with Penn State and with so many of the changes that are coming to the sport. Tim Brando's the guy to do it, isn't he?
He totally is. He's a voice of college football, and as you mentioned, the changing landscape of everything. I mean, let's face it. What we know about college football this season is going to change drastically in the next year to 2 years to 5 years, and I think he is a living example of how you bring excitement to the game, and it's something we all look forward to every Saturday.
It is, and we always look forward to his Twitter takes as well. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. I know we certainly enjoyed talking to him, and it gives us a taste, gentlemen, that fall is just around the corner. And like you said earlier, Dan, it's quite possible that he's calling a lot of Big Ten games. We may see him in Happy Valley.
I certainly hope so. He's one of my favorites. I'm very tough on announcers, Brett, and I think Shiner, you even know that too. That I'm very picky, and so I would much rather listen to Tim Brando than many others who I won't name.
Well, and we're certainly we're certainly lucky we had the chance to talk to him. So our thanks to Tim Brando. Once again, our thanks to Dave Shiner, who sat in so valiantly for you, Dan.
I did my best, as they say.
Well, you did more than that. It was great to have you to talk with. And Dan, welcome back. We're going to have you on board here now forevermore, and we're grateful that that you're going to be giving us your hot takes through the summer. And as Tim alluded to, and having him on, guys, it's almost time.
It's almost time. And I will say another thing. You're thanking Dave Shiner, but you should give yourself a pat on the back. You've been hitting all the buttons and doing all the directing on the side here. So
yeah, had to have an old dog learn some new tricks here.
You got it. And ain't that the truth? No doubt about it. Dan, we'll see you back here in person, we believe, next week. Thank you so much. Once again, here is how you can get our podcast. We are Weather Wagers. New episodes typically drop Wednesdays. It just so happened to be Thursday this week. We've got Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, and you can watch this podcast if you want to see the full interview with Tim Brando. It is on YouTube. So thanks to you, Dan, and thanks to you, Dave. We will see all of you, and thanks to all of you for listening right back here next week. Make it a great one.